is a Floridian. She's a parent who lost her son to drug use. She's going to share her very powerful story. Also, Sheriff Crawford of Hardee County is here. We appreciate him coming. Sheriff Potter of DeSoto, and Senator Colleen Burton. Thank you for taking the time to come. We appreciate you being here and lending your support as to why we are fighting back against Amendment 3. I'm honored really to be here with leaders from all across the state as I express my deep concern, particularly as a mother, about Amendment 3 and what it would mean if it passes for our state and for our communities. This amendment is not being driven by what is best for families, especially our children. It's being driven by one big weed company that has poured more than $100 million into this effort to put themselves into our state constitution as a way to make money, a lot of money. To be clear, they wrote this amendment to give themselves a permanent monopoly enshrined in our Constitution where people can only buy weed from them. What they couldn't do legislatively, they're trying to shoehorn themselves now into our state constitution, creating constitutionally protected weed cartel that will allow for marijuana usage anywhere, at any time, in any place, in any amount across the state of Florida. Parks, playgrounds, theme parks, sports complexes, libraries, pools, beaches, bars, malls, apartment complexes, hotels, shops, condos, movie theaters, sidewalks, you name it. If Amendment 3 passes, you will be subjected to the unrelenting smell of pot, and so will all children. Ask people who are fleeing places like Colorado and New York and New Jersey, where they have legalized recreational marijuana, where it has failed, and ask them, why did you leave? And one of the big reasons that they'll tell you was that smell of pot everywhere, and the implications and ramifications of what it meant to their communities. Some say, well, it can just be regulated through the legislature, right, Senator? Well, the problem is it's a constitutional amendment in our state constitution. The legislature, as you'll hear in a moment, would essentially be rendered powerless to be able to rein it in. States like Colorado actually have strong weed use regulations on the books, but such regulations have proved completely ineffective in practice. And oh, by the way, if you get sick or injured using their product, Big Weed have written themselves liability protections so you can't sue them if you get sick using their product. This, again, was written, this amendment, by the CEO of a big weed company who spent nearly, I heard now, $120 million to get this into the constitutional amendment. They're not doing that for you. They're betting the farm because they're doing it for themselves. It's corporate greed. And it's certainly not about your safety. It's not about your family's well-being. It's about, again, greed at the expense of Floridians. So as a mom, I'm very worried about having a state suffocating in nearly unregulated marijuana usage and the ramifications on our children. Legalization of recreational marijuana sends a very strong message to our kids whose brains are still developing until their mid-20s and who are extremely susceptible to major adverse reactions of pot, that it's safe. Let's be clear. Marijuana is a neurotoxin with TH levels 25 to 30% higher than it was in the 1970s. And what it is doing to our children's brains is scary. Dr. Latipo will speak to the evidence in a second, but take a 468-page study released back in 2017 by the National Academy of Medicine titled, in part, The Health Effects of Cannabis. In it, for more than a year, a committee of 16 professors and doctors studied the available evidence and data surrounding marijuana usage. Upon its completion, they said, in part, quote, cannabis use is likely to increase the risk of developing schizophrenia and other psychosis. The higher the use, the greater the risk. And this is especially true for our children. As First Lady of the state of Florida, I've had the honor and privilege to travel the state, to be able to meet with people and to spearhead several initiatives. And one of those initiatives is mental health, especially for our children. And I'll never forget this stop that I had at a Baker Act receiving facility in South Florida. And I met with one of the physicians there who was intaking children who were coming into the Baker Act facility. And I remember asking him if he ever saw any evidence, anything to show him if there was any link between marijuana usage in children and exhibiting symptoms of psychosis and schizophrenia. And without hesitation, he looked at me and essentially said, it was undeniable. In addition, studies will also indicate that marijuana use among kids coincides with several setbacks, particularly in education. 30% of adolescents who use marijuana have shown increased rates of anxiety, depression, psychosis, schizophrenia, especially among young boys. 39% increased likelihood of receiving lower grades in school, 50% reduced chance of graduating from high school, 28% decreased likelihood of attending university, 31% lower probability of obtaining a degree, and more than twice the odds of dropping out of high school. And that's for the little ones out there, because I've got a 4-year-old at home. Since the legalization of recreational marijuana in California, there has been a 445% increase in the number of calls to the Poison Control Center related to marijuana exposure in children under the age of 5. When you are packaging potent THC in brownies, in gummies, in lollipops, of course there is going to be an increased risk for children to get this and to have them consume something that could potentially be fatal. In states where marijuana has been legalized, there is a troubling rise in fatalities linked to marijuana-impaired driving. On average, these states are experiencing a 10% increase in vehicular deaths post-legalization. In California, that number is 14%, and in Oregon, it's a 22% rise in deaths from driving under the influence of marijuana. So let's be clear. Amendment 3 is not about freedom. It is about corporate greed. It was written by Big Weed to get rich at the expense of Floridians. We don't have to look too far at the failed experiments that have happened in other states like Colorado and California. We are at a pivotal moment in Florida history where we can fight back, we can prevent this, and we can vote no on Amendment 3. And so with that, I'll turn that over to our great Surgeon General, Dr. Ladapo, because Dr. Ladapo, some will say, you know, marijuana is safe. There's no adverse reactions. It's a plant. It's a good alternative. What would you say to the people out there that are saying that nothing bad can happen as a result of smoking marijuana?
I want to say if they've been smoking marijuana, because like that's just a silly thing for someone to conclude, even if you want to use it. So thank you very much, First Lady. Everything you shared there was totally accurate and backed by published studies. There's a lot of research, and it's really sad and annoying because this research is research that has been in the literature, in the scientific literature for years. And unfortunately, just because of how our media likes to pick winners and losers, it's gotten very little attention. Just only recently did the New York Times acknowledge, they wrote an article that some of you may have seen about schizophrenia risk, and there being fairly good evidence that some kids, particularly boys, adolescent boys, as the First Lady was saying, are developing schizophrenia directly as a result of using marijuana. And I mean, I think that was a 2023 article, but this has been, the evidence of this is, goes back many years, and the studies have been consistent. I mean, it's like this secret that unfortunately folks who want people using marijuana, want young people using marijuana, just prefer folks don't know about, and so you don't see many stories about it. And I really appreciate how much the First Lady and my friend, her husband, the governor, really, you can tell when you listen to them that they're fighting for Florida, right? They're fighting for our future, and they're fighting against whatever the discussion points are. I know there are some amendments on the ballot. Whatever the amendments are, they're fighting to preserve what we have here in Florida. And it's something I love seeing about them, and you can feel it in their words. And it's for good reason. So Florida is a very special place. I mean, I only moved here 3 years ago, and when you look around the country, people look to Florida as like this bastion of freedom. And I even hear people from other countries in Europe tell me that they look to Florida as a special place where people are fighting for freedom and people represent freedom. And it's really sad that there isn't any other state that you can say that about. in the United States right now, but it's totally the truth. And how are we going to be able to, to do what we've done in the last few years? Governor DeSantis, for example, just seeing the country go one direction with COVID, and him saying, I mean, everyone was going one direction, and him saying, no, I'm going to go this direction because this is what I think is right. And whether it's that, or it's, some this craziness with transgender issues, with boys playing on girls' teams and that being okay, and using girls' bathrooms and that being okay, whatever it is, we've had leaders in this state, particularly the governor and his wife, who have said, no, that, everyone says this is what you're supposed to be doing. That doesn't seem like the right thing to do. So how are we going to be able to continue that if we have young people who are addicted to a substance, who, instead of thinking about what they're going to do in their lives, like what their goals are, taking care of people they care about, pursuing whatever their dreams are, instead of doing that, they're thinking about where they're going to find their next hit, where they're going to find their next, their next whatever the drug is. How are we going to do that when people lose IQ points, when they lose intelligence points, right? When they lose brain cells from using substances? How can we have a Florida that can stand separate and uniquely from whatever whatever silliness is overcoming the rest of the country or the rest of the world, when our people, sort of fall into the harms of addiction and of depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and all the other things that come with using marijuana. And we're not just picking on marijuana, whatever substance it is. I mean, every substance has a price. So you can't do that. And so for the future of this state, it's very important that we avoid policies that, want to drug out our youth, right? Because those are the youth that are drugged out, or youth that are much more easy to control, like we see in the rest of the country and unfortunately in parts of the rest of the world. We can do better. We have to do better. I mean, literally the world is counting on us to do better in Florida. So that's a reason why I'm really grateful for what the First Lady's been saying.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Latipo. And it's like everybody knows of that person. I was thinking about this when I was driving here. I had a dear friend when I was in high school who was like very successful. He was like a gregarious guy, hilarious football player. I mean, he could have done anything with his life. And I'll never forget, back then, he started going down the road of marijuana, and it was like a light was shut off. I mean, a once very bright, vibrant, hilarious guy just like was glazed over all the time. He started coming in dirty. He didn't even look like he was taking showers. I don't even know if he stayed on the football team. I don't know where he is today. I don't want to say his name because I don't want to put it out there, but I mean, my heart goes out to him. He had so much potential, but he went down that road of marijuana and it forever changed his life. That has to be a part of this discourse. Parents need to know the truth. They need to know the evidence. This can't be kept from them because, one corporation wants to suppress the truth because they're going to make a lot of money. That's not fair. So we have to make sure that we stand up for what is right and we stand up for our children. And the whole thing about, this is freedom, that's very rich from one company that is spending more than $100 million to say, oh yeah, it's freedom, but you can only buy it from us. And by the way, you can't grow it in your backyard. And if you get injured using our product, well, we have liability protection so you can't sue us. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to say that this is in any way freedom. We have to stand up for what is right, what is just, and what is true, and fight back against this false narrative. So I'll invite America's Sherriff into the conversation because another thing, if you want to look on the other side and how they would argue this, Sheriff, some might say, well, listen, if they're not prosecuting marijuana crimes, by the way, the number of people who are incarcerated solely for marijuana in state penitentiaries across the state of Florida is 0. So beyond that, so if you aren't doing these sorts of policing going after marijuana crimes, that opens you up to be able to do other things. What do you say to that?
Thank you, First Lady. We appreciate you being here today. And I've seen this advertisement, well, if you don't have to deal with marijuana, then it leaves you time to fight crime. Well, crime's at a 50-year low. And crime's at a 50-year low here because we don't have recreational marijuana, as they call it, recreational C-fund marijuana. The reality is, I ask you to look at California. Is their crime down? No. Look at every state that's legalized marijuana in any form. Is their crime down? No. Is their quality of life up? No. Have you seen any national or international commercials that says, come to California and Colorado, it's the great dope state? You know, have you ever seen that? No. The reality of it is, I've done this my entire life, and I say this from the bottom of my heart. I want you to go find a law enforcement officer and ask them, have you ever been to a death investigation from a drug overdose? And the ones that tell you yes will be the overwhelming majority. And then ask them, have you ever seen mom and dad and the family just crushed because this person has died of a drug overdose? And they'll say yes. Then ask them this. Has any one of those people that were crushed by the death of their loved ones looked you in the eye and said, gosh, I wish you'd have smoked more marijuana? No. I've been to those death scenes. And I've had mother after mother after mother tell me it started with marijuana. And then it wasn't strong enough. And then he experimented with something else. And he experimented with something else. But look at the quality of life. And the good doctor just said it. Florida is the vacation state of the entire world. People come here to have fun, and they do. People come here because it's safe and it feels safe, and they are. Crime's at a 50-year low here. Good things don't just happen. Good things happen because a lot of people work hard, and that's what Governor DeSantis, our First Lady Casey DeSantis, and a whole world of people do to make this the great place to be. Have you ever seen anybody gather up and say, well, let's all go to Oregon because, after all, we can smoke dope and wander through the woods? Is that what we want for Florida? Do we want people to bring their children to Florida and watch people smoking out next to them on our beautiful beaches or at our parks? That's what we have to decide. Look, I can show you in every state, and let me say it again, in every state that's legalized marijuana, we've seen an increase in crime, we've seen an increase in vehicle fatalities, we've seen an increase in vehicle crashes, and then you've got this company, as the First Lady said, that has written into the Constitution that they can't be sued. They can't be sued for any of the subsequent actions. In the legal world, they call it but for. But for your conduct, this wouldn't have happened. Well, you can't sue them. And by the way, if it's about legalization of marijuana, why can they sell you marijuana and make a big profit, but you can't grow a plant in your backyard? They wrote that in the Constitution, so you can still get arrested for growing marijuana, even though they can sell you legal marijuana. And you can buy legal marijuana and go home and resell it and get arrested. It's more complicated marijuana law than we have now. Now, either you have it or you don't. Either you have a medical marijuana card or you don't. And then I've heard people say, oh, but it'll do away with the black market, the illegal marijuana sellers. Okay, so you know, this just gives them cover for that. Oh, no, this will do away with it. Let me ask you this. When has any business or government been able to say, oh, I'm going to regulate it, I'm going to tax it, I'm going to market it, I'm going to sell it, and I can do it cheaper than the black market people that don't tax it, they don't try to regulate it, they don't do anything. What they're going to do is undercut this legal group, and they're going to sell a whole lot of illegal marijuana. So it's a trick. That's what it boils down to. It's a trick. My statement is, I work for you. You're my boss. If y'all say yes on 3, I'm going to salute and do the best I can. But I tell the folks that are even for Amendment 3, and I've talked to a lot of them, that send this group back to start over again and rewrite their constitutional amendment, since they can't work through the legislature. The legislators who we elect know better than to allow something like that to happen. And then say that you can grow your own plant in the backyard. And say that you can be liable. You see, they don't want that. That's why I'm voting against Amendment 3 for health reasons, safety reasons, quality of life reasons. And let me share something with you that I've seen over and over in law enforcement. I've done this my entire life. I have a quote at the office that we see whenever we arrest these criminals. Their attitude is, nothing matters until it matters. So it's not against the law until I get caught. Well, for those that are going to vote for 3 and look 6 months down the road and say, well, nothing's happened. Well, it doesn't matter until it matters. But when your loved one's killed in the head-on collision because somebody was stoned, when your child comes to you and said, you know, I started with this experimental stuff and now I'm on the hardcore drugs, and that's what I've seen my entire life. And it frightens me. It frightens me for your children and your grandchildren. And I ask everyone to think about it. And then from a taxpayer's perspective, I want you to think about this. Colorado said for every $1 they take in tax money from the sale of legal marijuana, it costs $4 in services. So it's a loser. Or how about the fact that every drug-sniffing canine in the state of Florida will have to be decommissioned and sent home with their owners, or because we don't teach them to say, okay, this is marijuana, Paul once for marijuana, Paul 2 times for cocaine, Paul 3 times for heroin. All the canines go home, and we start over at a remarkable cost to the taxpayers. But unintended consequences is what will make the difference. And I suggest to you that it does matter before it matters. And it's the unintended consequences. And it's the fact that I don't want to be sitting here in 3 years or 5 years saying, I tried to tell you it wasn't a good idea, when our crime's up, when our tourism's down, when the people are calling the office nonstop about, you know, I can't sleep tonight because, and it goes on and on and on. But at the end of the day, folks, it's a decision you've got to make. I'm voting no.
And I'm with you. So, you know, you brought up a really good point, though, about Colorado, because that was one of the main narratives going back when they legalized recreational marijuana. They said, well, you know, because we're going to have a legal recreational market, you won't have the black market. We'll be able to. And that was totally false. Of course the black market came in. And one of the things that we've been fighting so hard against is the fentanyl crisis, right? Just an itty-bitty little tiny amount can kill somebody within seconds. And so just imagine if you have this black market coming in that's not regulated and this gets mixed within the population, I mean, there's going to be fatal consequences for people all across the state. That is a proven fact of what has happened in Colorado and elsewhere. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to stand up and vote no. The other thing I think is an important conversation to have, Senator Martin will bring you into the conversation, is about the difference between what the legislature does versus a constitutional amendment, because some people have said, well, can't you just regulate it? Because right now, it is a constitutional right that will be enshrined in the state constitution, meaning like, if somebody's standing in line for a ride to an amusement park, they have a constitutional right to smoke it right in front of your kids. Or if you want to go out to eat and you want to sit on the sidewalk with your family and you want to get a cup of coffee or whatever it might be, and somebody wants to sit down next to your children and they want to light up and smoke a marijuana, they have a constitutional right. So talk about that important distinction between a right versus what you guys would regulate in the legislature, and what can be done, if anything, if this passes.
Thank you very much for the question. First Lady, thank you for putting together this incredible panel as well. If the first couple speakers didn't convince you to vote no on Amendment 3, I don't know if I have anything in addition to add. But let me tell you this. Constitutional law, constitutional rights trump statutory law and statutory rights. It's how our country was founded. It's how Florida was founded. That's why it's so important, and it's why it should be difficult to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. If this passes, the legislature has the right under Amendment 3 to do some regulation. The problem is there's not a whole lot we can do to regulate it because of how this was written. So if you look at the first component, and it was touched on, civil and criminal liability, the manufacturers of this marijuana will not be civil or criminally responsible. The legislature can't then go in afterwards and pass a law from all the legislators that you voted for. We can't go pass a law to get rid of that civil or criminal liability. So down the road, if there's a big public outcry and we find out that these companies did something to injure kids or to market to kids unlawfully, we are not going to be able to remove that without another constitutional amendment. So everything in this has to be consistent. Every law that we pass in Tallahassee has to be consistent with this 7-page constitutional amendment. Now, if you're researching all the other constitutional amendments, there's 6 on the ballot this year. None of them are as long as this one. In fact, Amendment number 2 that protects our right to hunt and fish is 8 lines long. It's 8 lines. This is 7 pages, and it's very contradictory. And there's a few other pieces in there I want to mention that are going to be problematic if the legislature then has to go in and enact this, or do what the people want us to do, which is regulate smoking in public. And there's been a handful of prominent Republicans that have said, hey, as long as we can regulate smoking in public, then you should vote for this. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can't regulate smoking recreational marijuana in public if Amendment 3 passes. And this is the really, really, really confusing part, and this is why I actually started to speak up about this. If you look at section C6, C6 was copied and pasted from the previous medical marijuana amendment. It allows the legislature to regulate smoking medical marijuana in prisons, detention facilities, and in public places. Nowhere in that paragraph does it mention recreational marijuana. The lawyers messed up. And if this was passed through the legislative process, this would have been caught at one of the committee stops. One of our advisors in one of the committees, or a staffer, assuming none of the politicians caught it, would have said, hey, wait a second, we should add the word recreational in here, or we should cross off the word medical, like the drafters of this amendment did in other parts of those 7 pages. The reason that they didn't cross off the word medical was because they weren't concerned with regulating recreational marijuana. That wasn't the whole purpose, and going to the First Lady's purpose, it was to protect a business model. So by not crossing off the word medical, not only did they tell us their intent was to protect a business model, but also their negligence is going to make it impossible for the legislature, regardless of what bill we pass, because if we pass a bill to regulate smoking in public, the Florida Supreme Court is going to come in and say, well, they expressed the type of marijuana that you could regulate public smoking, and that type of marijuana was not recreational marijuana, it was medical. And as the lawyers know, the expression of some implies the exclusion of others, the intentional exclusion of others. So when the courts say, well, they intended to include medical marijuana, the legislature can't come in and add additional types of marijuana to that exclusion. And if we do that, it's going to be unconstitutional, which means there's going to be smoke everywhere. And that's the only reason that many of these Republicans who read the subject of the amendment, but they didn't read all 7 pages, they didn't talk to their lawyers about the 7 pages, they missed the boat. And we're going to end up not being able to regulate smoking marijuana throughout the entire state of Florida if Amendment 3 passes. And thirdly, just briefly dovetailing off the components of safety, I was a prosecutor the first part of my legal career. I've been a personal injury lawyer for the last 10 years, and I feel like I'm the only personal injury lawyer speaking up about this. I don't want more crashes. I don't want more deaths. We need safer roads. And not a single state got safer when they legalized recreational marijuana. And there's a crazy study out of Canada. I don't even want to say it because the numbers are so high, but you can look it up. Bing it, Google it, DuckDuckGo it. You're going to find that the increase in fatalities and serious crashes skyrocketed. And if you think car insurance is expensive now in the state of Florida, wait till the fatalities and the injuries skyrocket.
Thank you, Senator. Amy, let's bring you into the conversation. You're with Drug Free America. You've been studying this issue probably, you said, for 15, 20 years. You've been watching what happened in Colorado and other states where they've done this legalization. What has been your analysis? Have you seen successful models? Have you seen this be a good thing for the state? I mean, they talk about generating revenue. That's what this is all about. But what about the lives that are impacted and the cost that it would take to be able to provide, as the sheriff said, services for people who are impacted by the negative effects of marijuana?
Sure, thank you, and thank you for putting this together, and thank everybody who showed up today to listen. Nothing good. Nothing good so far. So many states have tried this, and I know that every state likes to say, well, we can do it better, we can do things differently, but not anything good has come so far. Sure, has it brought in some tax revenue? What sounds like a lot of money to me and probably to you, but when you look at that up against a state budget, it's less than 1% of the state budget. And we're going to have to spend so much money to regulate it and to address all the harms that everybody else has already talked about, the impaired driving, the increased youth use, the increased hospitalizations, all of that stuff that goes with it is going to cost a lot of money to enforce. So the money issue is just kind of out the window. But you know, even talking to people from other states, which you've brought up, so many people come here to escape that. They leave Colorado to raise their family here because they couldn't go outside without their baby's clothes smelling like marijuana by the time they got back into the house, or having to always have to answer to their kids, like, what is that bright neon sign on my way to school? Or, you know, what are they selling next door to the ballet classes? Like, these things are everywhere, and those are questions that we're going to have to address. And you brought up the rights of the child. And I think that that's what this boils down to for us at Drug Free America, for I know many of you, you know, our main concern is our kids and what's happening to the kids in our state, in our country, and around the globe. And there's only one UN convention that actually talks about the rights of the child, and to sum it up, it basically says that kids have the right to grow up in a drug-free environment. And that's not something we're going to create with this. We don't have that now, but this is even going to put more of that on there. You're going to see more dispensaries. You're going to see the use in public. You're going to see kids bombarded with that. And when we talk about that bombardment of messages, that normalization of these messages, there was some research that came out by a marketing company a few years ago, and it said that women have influence over 70% of purchasing power, right? And I'll deny this if my husband's listening, that we shop a lot, but we do influence what's being bought. And the marijuana industry has really tackled that. They've taken that on. And if you look at the products that they're promoting, a lot of those are specifically promoted to women and girls. They're trying to make sure that their products are pretty, that they're useful to girls and to women, because they're trying to get, just like big tobacco did, a lifelong user, because they're in this for the long run, they're in this for the money, they're in this for building the business that we've talked about. So they're specifically targeting women and girls, and you can see that on social media, you can see that in the products that they're making, these high potency products that look like candy, that, you know, look like unicorns and princesses and different things that look appealing to kids. And so how is that impacting the rights of the child? How are we making sure that our kids grow up in a drug-free environment? And this is definitely not going to help us there.
One thing that just strikes me that, that the governor has stood for every step since he has been governor of the state of Florida, and that's standing up for truth. One of the things that personally really irritates me as a mother is when you go on these various websites and you read this study and you read that study, and it's like hard to find out what is the truth. Like, what can I do best to protect my children, to protect my family? What do I eat? What do I not eat? Does this cause this? Does this? And then you come to find out that there's a lot of special interests out there that are pushing this, and they are indeed paying for this, and they are creating narratives to be able to sell their product, not because they care about you, they care all about their revenue. And that's one of the reasons why, and a matter of fact, I stood up from this really from the very beginning, starting with the Facts Your Future, and we started doing a drug program within our schools to provide kids with the evidence, the facts, and the truth to educate them so that they can make well-informed decisions so that they can decide what's best for them. It was like, just say no, but the important part was, here's why, right? You need to empower them with the truth and what we know, so that way, here is what happens with, high levels of THC on a developing brain. Here's what happens if you're smoking meth. This is what it does to your face. This is what happens if you're doing other drugs and what have you. Here's fentanyl and what it would do in 2 seconds if you're exposed to it. So, we've always looked at it from a preventative model, but now with this legalization, it's going to be opening up the floodgates, and we're fighting already against a lot of this. It's going to make it 10 times harder for parents in particular. I saw my son the other day, he was out playing baseball with some friends, and I was like, what are they eating? And they were all getting sunflower seeds or whatever in the dugout. But as a mom, I got to be careful. If what is that, a gummy? Is that a THC laced gummy? What is it? And your head is on a swivel. And so it's like when you have one company that is spending so much money creating a cartel where you can only buy this from them, you cannot sue them, you cannot have this in your backyard. They do not care about the well-being of children. They're not looking at the evidence and the data of what Dr. Latipo or Drug Free America has seen going back not just a few years, it's been there forever, but you see these narratives that get pushed, these studies that are funded by the special interests because they're in it for a buck. We are not a revenue-producing unit for you. We want to know the truth. We want to live a happy life. We want to live a healthy life, and we want to know what we can do to protect our children. So with that, I bring in Karen Bailey. Very appreciative of you coming here and lending your voice, Karen. And also, I just want to say that, very sorry for your loss and your experiences. I can't even imagine, I love my kids so much, but you coming up now and speaking to this, I think is really important now. And I appreciate you being here.
I will start off by saying that. Am I on?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. I'll start off by saying that when you change the brain, you change the heart. And anybody under the age of 25 that is smoking marijuana and they think that it's cool and it's safe because it's medicine, you're changing your brain and not in a way that's good. I had 2 children, Corey and Alyssa, and Corey was the first to get in trouble with opioids. And so I was taking him to counseling one day, and I always wanted to have an open conversation where they could come and talk to me about whatever. And I said, so how did this start for you? And he says, oh, Mama, he says, that's easy. It started with pot. And I said, well, how does pot turn into the opioid addiction that we're fighting now? And he said, when we're out at the lake wakeboarding or after a football game or at the Gator games tailgating, he says, we start off with pot and marijuana. He said, but then it runs out. And he says, then somebody's always got something else. And he says, when you're having fun with your friends, you don't want that fun to end. You want it to keep going. So we've lost so many children in our county due to the opioid crisis. And on that note, my daughter also was addicted. She was younger than Corey, 2 years. We lost, Corey and Alyssa shared marijuana, I assume. Never caught them doing that, but as easily as they shared marijuana, they shared pills together the day that Corey died. And Alyssa took her life 42 months later. So it's just, but for the grace of God. God is good. The Bible's true. I dug into my Bible after that, and God is so good. He is, I promise. And we are just headed down a road that I don't want for any other parent, because I can't imagine not having my faith, because you go into a grief pit when you bury a child, and it's hard to climb out of that grief pit. There's days you don't want to get out of bed, and days that you cry all day, and just when you go to cook their favorite dinner or their meal, you find yourself on the floor crying. So I think that marijuana has been taken too casually, and honestly, I don't understand leadership that would push this. It's not what is in the best interest for the children of the state of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Can I say one thing? Casey, think about this. If they weren't trying to attract children, why do they make gummy bears out of THC? Let me say that again. Why do they make gummy bears out of THC? Why do they market to children? Because they're the most pliable? Because children at that young age, by and far, have never seen death. They're going to live forever. And then the next thing you know, we have a drug problem. Now, I understand that you look at the data and that doesn't sell in a campaign, in a market. But it ought to sell to mom and dad. Because you know what? It doesn't matter until it matters. And you've got this big business who've excluded their liability. You can't sue them. Who have also said in that same constitutional amendment, oh, you can't grow a marijuana plant in your backyard. But we can we can create gummies and sell marijuana, and we can market to your children. And then downstream, the bad things that happen, we can't be sued. Think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at a point in Florida's history where we can stand up and vote no. But as the senator said, I mean, you can't really unring the bell. I mean, there's nothing that the legislature can do to rein it in. I mean, you would have to try to pass another constitutional amendment, a referendum. I mean, it would be here. And as what we saw in Colorado, they tried to pass, legislation to try, and it's been ineffective. And, the other thing is just a quality of life. I think this, you talk about how does this affect me, right? If you're not a parent, and let's say you're not a grandparent, but wherever you go in the state of Florida, chances are there's going to be pot smoke. I mean, it's going to be there. You want to go out for a nice dinner with your family. Like I said earlier, you want to go get a cup of coffee. They have a constitutional right to be able to light up right next to you. The business owner and everyone wouldn't have to be any recourse to be able to stop that person. And once that starts, that changes the entire landscape of the state of Florida. And so with that, if there's any other points that, yeah, go ahead, Amy, like to make.
So on that point, we're actually on a good track in the state of Florida. Thanks to the Facts Your Future campaign, thanks to the money that's come out of the opioid settlement crisis, that we're actually able to start addressing some of these harms in our communities and fight back against this drug crisis. And we have, we're one of very few states who are starting to see a decrease in opioid deaths. We saw, according to the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey, that less kids are using marijuana now. All that goes out the window if this happens. And so it's going to take a big toll on all the work that we've put in to protect families in Florida, to protect kids in Florida, to be on that path that we're at now, to actually be putting a dent in some of these really harmful things that are happening in our community. It's going to take us back a decade if this passes on those issues.
And having personally seen somebody who has suffered from the effects of schizophrenia and psychosis, it's awful. If you have ever watched somebody have hallucinations, to have just the most fearful things projected in front of them as if it were reality, I mean, it is a really miserable thing to experience. And from what I have heard there, in my case with people that I have known, there's not really anything that you can do by and large to treat schizophrenia. And so, you know, this is just something that, that is a possibility as you're looking at the evidence and the science and the data and everything that backs it up from studies that go back a little ways in time. So we have the opportunity now to stand up and say, no, we're doing great in Florida. We're doing really well. We have people coming here from all over the world to vacation. A lot of people are moving here because they love the freedom that Florida provides. Our economy is doing well despite some federal headwinds. I mean, we're doing well. Our education system is #1, K through 12, #1 higher education. University of Florida is the 4th ranked public university in the country. I mean, we have a 50-year crime low. We support law enforcement. We attract law enforcement that isn't getting the respect that they deserve in other states to come to Florida, and we give you a bonus for what you're doing to say thank you. We're doing good. We don't need one big weed cartel to come in who's shoveled $100 million into this initiative to basically say, yeah, it's freedom, except for you can only buy from us and you can't sue us and you can't hold us liable and you can't grow it in your backyard. That's not freedom. We don't need that in Florida. And so I'm just asking people across the state, moms, dads, grandparents, people who don't want to change the landscape of Florida, people who don't want to have to wade through marijuana smoke everywhere they're going, stand up, stand with us, stand with the governor, stand with myself, stand with the great people who are here in this panel, and millions of people across the state who are going to say no to Amendment 3. So God bless you and thank you.
Right in front of where we were standing.
It's good to see you. I hope we get to do